Hello, happiness abounder, and welcome back. So today I want to talk about working through fear. I know the theme for this week is working through discomfort, but I think fear is the foundational element of when we feel uncomfortable. I mentioned how last week I was at several conferences and how going and networking with other people kind of made me feel uncomfortable. So when I think back to why did I feel uncomfortable, not just what were the tips I was using for procrastination, what were those tools I was pulling from, but when I think back, why did I feel uncomfortable, it's rooted in a fear. Rooted in the fear of being rejected. Rooting in the fear of that people won't understand me or won't want to engage with me. So I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about how fear is usually at the underground level, the foundation of discomfort. And when we can know that, we can start to get rational about that fear. We can start to really understand what is driving us in our current discomfort and our current actions. And is that what we want to be? Is that who we want to be? So I'd like to share another story, not conference related, but podcast related. It may seem really weird. It's kind of weird to even say it out loud, but I told maybe 10 people. I think it was probably less. I told my husband, I told my mother-in-law, I told 3 friends, and my parents, my sister, and my brother-in-law, and my other sister. So yeah, I told 10 people that I was finally starting my podcast. And that's all I told for about 3 months. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing this. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing it every day. I was uncomfortable with that thought. And when I think back, why was I uncomfortable telling people, hey, I've got a podcast? It comes down to I got uncomfortable because I was afraid. I was afraid that people would then look at my podcast and go, that sucks. I was afraid that my own family who I told and my friends who I told would tell me I was doing it wrong or that it wasn't worth listening to, which wasn't the case. I didn't want to tell other people as well because I'm not a perfect person. I'm still working on my own happiness. So I didn't want people to look at me and go, you have a podcast on happiness? You? Now, I don't think anybody would say that. But I had this irrational fear in my head. And so I didn't tell anyone, like I said, for like 3 months. And funny enough, I remember and I recall one of the first times that I told someone in like a public setting that I had a podcast. And it was, I was at work and there's a Slack channel for podcasts. And I was in it to see other people's recommendations. And someone got on and they said, hey, do any of you guys listen to like self-help podcasts? Is there any you recommend? And I was like, yes, I totally do. I recommend XYZ. And, I have one too. And it was so nerve-wracking because here I was telling now almost a stranger, a coworker that I didn't really know, that I had a podcast where I spoke about happiness. And the story ends great. She ended up ended up coming to one of my classes and is now on this path that she was not on before on improving and growing in her life. And that's all her hard work. But when I look back at that, I think to myself, what if, and I'm not taking credit at all, but what if I hadn't gotten out of my comfort zone and dared to raise my hand and say, I have one. I was so afraid of being rejected. And I'm sure other people will probably like, wow, promoting your own podcast. Okay. But to that one person, it made a difference. And as I think about it, the more I tell people now, oh, I have a podcast. I have a podcast. But I was so afraid to tell people. I was so afraid to embrace publicly this project that I love. And it all came down to, I thought I was just uncomfortable talking about it because it's self-promotional and people aren't going to get it and people aren't going to know what a podcast is. And, oh, that person listens to true crime podcasts. So me saying I have one about happiness, probably like they're going to judge me and think I'm just like hippy dippy, and they're going to think that all I am is sunshine and rainbows and I'm not realistic, and all of these things, all of these thoughts that were supporting, quote, discomfort, end quote. But truth be told, it was rooted in fear. So that said, how do we work through fear? You know what's coming. Declarations. Yes, there's so many things that we're afraid of. And sometimes it's as simple as being like, okay, I'm going to step into this. But that's really hard to do if you don't know why you're stepping into that fear, why you're working through that discomfort. I knew that I needed to work through it because otherwise this whole thing would be a waste of time. I needed to start sharing that I have a podcast. I wanted to help people. This was my way of doing it. So I had to work through that fear. It took me 3 months and then some. I'm still working on it. But it took me a long time to work in that direction. And it's because it was rooted in fear. So that said, when I utilize my declaration, that helps me know who I want to be, helps me reconnect and realign to my purpose, and helps me work through that fear, get rational about it, and go, is this really something I'm afraid of? Is this something I need to be afraid of? Do I need to care what that person thinks? If they're going to judge me for talking about happiness every day, that's on them, right? I had to get rational about this to be able to work through it. And my number one way to get rational is to realign on who I want to be and utilize my declaration. My declaration talks about being an intuitive mentor. It talks about being vibrant, abundant, and full of light. It talks about being secure in my purpose. And when I can pull from those things, I know who I want to be, and I can work through that fear. I can get rational about, is this what I want to do? Is this who I want to be? Or do I need to step and work through that? So while the last couple episodes we've been talking about being aware of how you procrastinate, very important, because it is rooted in fear. And I highly recommend creating a declaration to help you get there, to get working through it, to step into your best self and your best life. So that said, if you are interested in taking a declarations course, learning how to craft one that is custom for you, that really works to help align you and also help manifest the things you want in your life, I recommend going to happinessabound.com, clicking on courses, and I have one for declarations, which is an online recording, so you can watch it at your convenience. But in the meantime, I want you to be thinking about those things that make you feel uncomfortable. Those things that keep you from stepping into the light. And I want you to take a couple of mental steps back and ask yourself, why does this make me uncomfortable? And in most cases, it's going to root back to, you might have to ask that why a couple times, but it's going to root back to a fear of some sort. And that's a mental block that you can work through by using declarations. So tune in tomorrow as we talk about writing out after stories and things like that, and also the clear model on Friday. So that said, again, if you want to learn more about declarations, go to happinessabound.com, click on courses, and select declarations for happiness. But in the meantime, be asking those questions why, get rational about your fear, and above everything else, remember, you are capable of happiness abound.